Habari ya jioni, habari ya kwako, and salama tu. Hello and good afternoon in Kiswahili on today's day, the International Day of Biological Diversity. I feel very honored to have been invited by Steffi to give this talk. And it's actually about the biodiversity crisis, a call for action. But what I want to do today is want to show you briefly where we are with this crisis and how you, as the DLD community, can contribute to resolving it. Because you do have a role, even though you probably haven't discovered it yet. Now, today's International Day of Biological Diversity. Those of you who have been in the session on women's health might know that in 6 days' time, 28th of May is International Day of Menstruation. And, even better, on the 18th of October is International Menopause Day. So these things are being acknowledged at some point. And the reason why I know about this is because reproductive health in females is not just an issue in women, but also in threatened mammalian species. So I talk briefly about the extent of the biodiversity crisis. I talk about the causes and drivers, and I will make a business case for action before I come to that action, which is basically two things: knowing the problem and finding the solution. And in this case, we really can classify these in three groups, where both the problem and the solution is known, but nothing happens. Then there's many cases where the problem is known, but not the solution. And these are often entrenched conflicts of interest that have been going on for decades. And finally, there are many cases when we neither know the problem nor the solution, and unfortunately, it's the most common case. Anyway, the extent of the biodiversity crisis, we call it the biodiversity crisis, but it really is a multitude of many processes running in parallel, and what they do is they really contribute to the extinction of populations and species of animals, plants, fungi, and microbes. And that at an unprecedented speed. I'm a zoologist, so I talk about wildlife for the rest of the talk, but you couldn't transfer what I'm saying to the other groups as well. That speed is 100 times faster than the extinction of species in the past 5 mass extinctions in geological time. And it is accelerating, as you can see on that graph, and even in the 2 decades of this century, it is accelerating. So something is going wrong. Now, the causes and drivers, this is a highly, if you like, individual summary. There are basically 4 groups. Group number 1 is greed and overexploitation. That leads to the loss of charismatic species. If you eat caviar, you should know that most of it is illegally harvested, and 26 of 28 species of sturgeons, the ancient fish that gives caviar, are threatened with extinction. And of course, you all know about elephant tusks and rhino horns. Then there's a group of causes and drivers that I called naive stupidity and carelessness, which really led to the ascent of invasive species. Many species have been put out in other continents for hunting, or for the biological control of pests, and sometimes we also put cats and rats and goats onto other islands, and they also wreak havoc on the local species. In addition to that, there is a component that I'd call ignorance, and that is really spreading the pathogens that can kill people or other wildlife, and we all know about SARS-CoV-2. And finally, there's of course the commercial interests that lead to habitat and fragmentation, such as deforestation, converting it into cattle pastures, oil palm plantations, and arable land. Now, there's a business case for action, and that is that ecosystem services that these natural landscapes and animals provide to us have a monetary value that is equivalent to the entire world's gross domestic product, if you had to buy it in commercial terms. I'll say that again. Those ecosystem services that they deliver voluntarily to us has the monetary value of the entire world's GDP. So that includes prevention of flooding through beavers, the pollination of food plants. If you ever had any tequila, that comes from agave that's been pollinated by bats, and bats are really important pollinators in the tropics. And there's many other ecosystem services delivered by wildlife. Not only that, but there's also cultural values, particularly in Africa and in Asia, but also in other places. If you lose species, we also lose these cultural values. So, action. Knowing the problem, for some issues, this is clear. We have illegal wildlife trade, which is organized crime. We have wholesale destruction of natural habitats. That's a lack of legal framework, enforcement, and wrong priorities. And we have pollution, particularly plastic pollution, which adds ignorance as well. For others, though, it is not. And so the big question there is about the adaptability of wildlife to global change. Some species know how to adjust to this, but others do not, and we cannot predict which species are successful in coping and others which are not. The raccoon now lives in Berlin and many other cities in Europe, even though it's a North American species. And these mute swans in the UK know how to get fed from cars, but others don't know so well. And me and my team at my institute, we have spent 20 years trying to work out how we can improve what we need to do about it. And we've boiled it down to 3 elements. We need to massively accelerate the assessment of the status of wildlife populations. We need to develop a framework for prognosis and novel and effective measures. I'll show you the first one because I haven't got time for the other 2. But it's amazing that we still know so little about the population status of many species, the challenges they face, whether they can cope with it, and so on. I'll do that with that lovely rhinoceros, the Saba rhinoceros, a subspecies of the Sumatran rhino at the brink of extinction. It only occurs in Borneo. It's the most ancient rhino. It's known as the woolly rhino because it has lovely hair, and it's the only rhino that sings. Can we have the video, please? Right. In 2009, we came to Borneo to assess their status, and we asked the stakeholders which questions they had. We went and did field studies. We assessed the reproductive health of animals in captive holdings, and we modeled that population. At the time, people thought there was more than 50 individuals in northern Borneo, in Sabah, and it took us 5 years to work out that even in 2009, there cannot have been more than 5 animals in Sabah and 5 animals in Kalimantan, the larger part of Borneo. And all the females that we looked at had reproductive pathologies in their reproductive organs, so they had very limited fertility. And that's what the population looked like. There were more than 3,000 rhinos initially in Sabah, and during the British colonial time, more than 100 individuals were killed every year. So we have a driver in the past, which is trophy hunting, and we have now a driver, which is the limited fertility of females. And the only way to handle that means is we take tissue cells from these rhinos, we develop fibroblasts, we do tissue cultures and create and grow organs, reproductive organs, from which we then want to harvest sperm and egg cells to make new babies. And I can tell you that it's a massive challenge. It's taken ages to do this in humans, and we are not yet at that, but this is the only chance for these rhinos. Okay, so we need to accelerate the assessment. For that, I think we need high-tech science, but we also need citizen science. And this is where you come in, the digital community. We need to empower local communities all over the world that they can record their own data about the state of their own environment. And for that, we need appropriate technology, simple digital solutions. In Tanzania, everybody's got access to a phone. So it is, in principle, possible that they have access to the internet. They have no postal services, but they do have a phone. So this is where I invite you to join. For the highly endangered species, we do need these advanced assisted reproduction techniques. So, pardon me. For some issues, the problems and the solutions are clear. To combat organized crime, we need special task forces, and for some others, we need to set the international framework. When the issue is clear, but not the solution, then we need to deal with the human factor. And this is where the responsible science comes in. And I show this to you in 2 cases, farmer-cheetah conflict in Namibia and German wind farms against German bats. Now, the cheetah in Namibia, the cheetah is the most endangered species of the large cats. Most cheetahs occur in Namibia. Most cheetahs in Namibia occur on commercial farmland. So the fate of cheetahs is decided on commercial farmland. And they've been persecuting these because cheetah actually kill cattle calves. So we talked to the farmers, we asked what their questions were, and then we set out using telemetry to study the cheetah movements and answer their questions. And what we discovered was that, as you can see with these black lines, the movements of cheetahs, some of these areas have hotspots, as you can see with this heat map. And this is where the cheetah kill cattle calves if the cattle give birth in these locations. So we asked the farmer 1 year to move his cattle away from this place, and lo and behold, no losses anymore. The farmer said, but next year, the cheetahs are going to find the calves there. But the cheetahs didn't. They stayed in their hotspots, and they just ate what was in front of them. They were not particularly interesting calves. And so the farmers all now want to know where the hotspots are so they can manage their cattle. Their attitudes have changed, their behavior has changed, and the cheetah-farmer conflict is no more. In the rest of the world, we are far from resolved these kinds of conflicts between carnivores and farmers. Now, the green-green dilemma, we need wind power, but wind power kills bats. 30,000 wind power plants in Germany, each of them kills more than between 2 and 30 bats, so that's 200 to 300,000 bats killed at German wind farms every year. That is massive. So the question, studying the issues with stakeholders and their questions, we discovered that actually there is a really interesting distribution of activities. The bats only fly at low wind speeds when the wind farms cannot be very good at producing energy. So if we shift the threshold of switching in the wind farm just by a small amount, losing 5% of energy production, we have a massive reduction in the killing of bats. And so this is one way of solving this, but we would have never found this out had we not gone to the stakeholders and asked them what to do. So in conclusion, where we know the problem, the solution, and nothing happens, the governments are in charge. Where we have problems, but not the solution, we often have conflicts of interest. This is where we need responsible science, but not everything needs scientific research. I think this is where democratization, empowerment, generation of data through citizen science and through the stakeholders will often be the way forward. That is where your contribution could come in. And finally, for the problem where we don't know the problem, the solution, where we have the most common case, we need to accelerate the assessment. Again, that's where I think you need to come in so that we can do all these things. You know, that wildlife out there, they're watching you. They're hoping you contribute. Thank you very much.